much, Rahul, and good evening to my panelists as well. I must say, the comments by Mr. Khurshid are very welcome. Except that, may I disagree with him on one count where he says that whatever we are functioning, and these are internal debates. I beg to disagree. I think everyone around the world should be able to discuss all events that happen in any country around the world. I see myself as a human being as much as an Ethiopian as I see myself as an Indian. So if I am free to discuss the lack of democracy in China, Chinese should be able to discuss the extent of democracy. But the sad truth, Rahul, is, and here I would beg a couple of minutes because I think it's a very important topic. It's a very rational debate we're having that, at least to me, democracy more often than we'd like to admit is not so much the defeat of the elected as it is of the electorate. Let me explain. But for that, one would have to define how to judge democracy by. And again, there are multiple and varied scales, but in my view, it can be broadly judged on four parameters: freedom of speech and expression, independence of judiciary and executive, federal and state performances, and collusion of those in power. And if you were to analyze each of these parameters objectively, as I have been doing, and I hope everyone is, you will realize that we haven't really changed, for better or worse, as far as democracy is concerned, for decades. Now, let me elaborate this and strengthen what I see here, buttress briefly on all these. Number one, freedom of speech and expression. Now, BJP is as good or as bad as its predecessor, UPA. In fact, one doesn't have to go historically to the time of Nehru or Indira Gandhi, where freedom of speech and expression was brutally stormed upon through the First Amendment by Nehru, banning of films or jailing of editors or whatever. BJP is still doing it. If BJP slapped sedition charges on 10,000 tribals during the NDA 2, then UPA slapped 12,000 activists with sedition charges in one single day, with Chidambaram calling them anti-nationals. So this is a pan-political party problem. This is I would say, sorry to say this, but a constitutional endowment that we storm upon freedom of speech and expression. If at all, what has happened in this, unfortunately, what has happened in this government is that we have given anarchists free run. So, for example, I'm not very sure if Congress would have allowed anarchists to block highways for a whole year, but BJP has. Second, let us come to independence of judiciary and executive. I don't want to comment too much on independence of judiciary because I don't want to be held in contempt of court, and neither do you, except to say that one must read Supreme Whispers. This is by Mr. Chandrachud. It's a fantastic book. It's about quotes by judges, Supreme Court judges, and there you see one judge saying that Indira Gandhi used to decide, the Supreme Court judge, based on the political, ideological inclination of those judges. And if they were even so much as slightly inclined towards RSS, then they would be rejected. In fact, one attended the funeral of RSS Gowalkar and he was not made Supreme Court judge. As far as executive is concerned, Rahul, we are totally not independent. You see the CBI, you see the ED, they are the working arms, they are parrots of the legislature. Now, third is caring for global brotherhood. And here, as I said, I am at variance with Mr. Khurshid because we don't care about the 1.5 million Uyghur Muslims that are interned in concentration camps in China are being fed pork. We haven't castigated China for it. We did not castigate China for the Tiananmen Square massacre. In fact, Rajiv Gandhi blocked all coverage of the Tiananmen Square massacre when it happened. This is on record. Finally, on federal and state performance, just a minute, Rahul, it's very important. Now, this is where, I see the hypocrisy of the people who discuss that, Modi is responsible for everything, but they want federal and state variants when it suits them. For example, they will not talk about the stomping of freedom of speech and expression and draconian ordinances being brought in Bengal, where the High Court is castigating Bengal government, where 20,000 panchayat posts will go unelected. They won't talk about collusion of Congress in Maharashtra, where on one hand you say that Shiv Sena is draconian and fascist, and the other you have a form a government with them. But when it suits them, everything is on Modi to blame. But here, just 30 seconds. Here is the wonderful example where everything comes together. All political parties agree when it comes to collusion, and nothing can be done by us, the electorate. You talk about the FCRA. Rahul, the High Court, just 30 seconds, the High Court of Delhi had convicted both BJP and Congress for violating the FCRA guidelines in getting money from a private company. What did BJP do? It amended the FCRA Act going back as far as the emergency 1976. So the High Court could not do anything. It was powerless. But who supported the BJP when the FCRA Act was amended? You guessed it, the Congress. So, as I said, democracy in my mind is as much or more a defeat of the electorate as it is of the elected. Very briefly, just to clarify to Mr. Salman Khurshid that I was insistent to not use too many historical examples because I knew then I would be accused of, delving into the past. I mean, I use contemporary examples like Maharashtra right now, Bengal right now, Chhattisgarh right now, where there is practically no freedom of speech and expression, that a man who complained of a power cut was slapped with sedition charges, so on and so forth. So this has been happening. As far as my good friend Pawanji is concerned, he is absolutely right, Rahul, that when we accept the freedom of ease of doing business, then we must also accept the hunger index. The only addition that I would make there, Pawanji, is that many of these indexes are based on objective analysis. For example, you can see GDP per capita, you can see the extent of manufacturing and all that. So you get a very robust value for ease of doing business. Likewise, you can judge malnutrition, you can judge mortality rate, and so on and so forth. You get a very good hunger index value. As far as democracy is concerned, I'm afraid it is so biased because it delves into the selectivity and subjectivity. Just to give you an example, that Rahul Gandhi, when he cited the Swedish thing that said India is no longer a democracy but a electoral autocracy, that same document, when it came to India, it said before 2014, rarely if ever were sedition charges slapped on anyone. Now, it completely overlooked that 12,000 sedition charges were slapped on activists in 2012 under the UPA. So, when you talk of subjective analysis and making of these indexes, then sure, the government has a right to object. But as far as objective thing is concerned, then yes. And finally, just 10 seconds. I value your opinion so much, but I have to disagree with you that when you are comparing us with China, it is like comparing the astuteness and political equity of Pawan Verma with Prashant Kishore. I mean, there is no comparison. I'd much rather compare India with Sweden or Nordic countries than with China.
Dr. Ranganathan, before I wrap this up.
No,
yes,
I have
very
been
quickly,
official
wonderful points.
Yeah,
wonderful points raised by Pawanji and Salmanji. But I would just like to add that I think I value the criticism that happens internally much more than what happens externally.
True.
And the tragedy is that the government only listens to the criticism that comes from abroad. For example, ease of doing business. Now, the government can do 3 or 4 things very quickly, and it has, for us to be elevated on that ease of doing business scale. For example, reduce the red tape, this and that. But when it comes to democracy, despite promises, the government has not made the investigative agencies independent. Despite promises, the government has not abrogated clause 2 of Article 19(1)(a), despite Manish Tiwari writing after he went out of power that the government should abrogate clause 2, 19(1), article of our constitution to give us freedom of speech and expression.
Yes.
So there are things that the government can do immediately for us to rise on this democracy scale, but it doesn't.
With you, Dr. Ranganathan, how do you assess this? A tale of 2 demolitions.
Good evening, Rahul, and good evening to all my fellow panelists. Look, not caring about our history is bad enough, Rahul. But to destroy it, and to destroy it like this right before our eyes, is nothing short of criminal. I'm appalled. But I have 3 things to say. Number 1, I want to thank you for dispassionately and objectively exposing the hypocrisy of all parties here. And by all, I mean Congress as well as the BJP. You see, since morning, when you've informed that Rajgarh municipality is controlled overwhelmingly by the BJP, and yet they ordered the demolition of this temple, and yet BJP, all Karyakartas as well as their leaders have been castigating the Congress and the Congress government for demolishing a 300-year-old temple. They are responsible for this. And number 2, for exposing the Congress by saying that if in both cases, in Alwar, the BJP corporations or the municipality does the demolition drive, then you don't think. But if in Jahangirpuri, the same BJP controlled municipality does the demolition drive, again it is religion agnostic, there you go to the Supreme Court. So both parties are to blame. But here, can I also add one thing, and this is very important. Number one, the blame should not just be limited to political parties. It has to go to institutions. How on earth, when ASI as well as DAMH rules stipulate that any monument or building that is more than 100 years old has to be qualified as a heritage building, how on earth was this demolished without a court order? Because I can quote from the director of DAMH, which is heritage and archaeology department, as well as ASI, Rahul, that a heritage building anywhere, you have to get a court order in order to demolish it. On what basis have they demolished our heritage? A 300-year-old temple, 1709 or roundabout there it was. This is criminality. And this is not just limited to Alwar, or you can say Congress government. In Gujarat, so many temples have been demolished on the pretext of development. And in my state, Tamil Nadu, in Tanjore, on the pretext of making a smart city, Rahul. What is happening is criminality, but because it is not BJP or Congress, it doesn't come into news. Do you know how many tens of temples, even a courthouse which is 400 years old, has been demolished in Tanjore? I don't know what to say. And then we cry that we don't know history. When we are demolishing it right in front of our eyes, how dare we then blame other people for saying that we don't care about history? This is criminal and really sad.
No problem.
Yeah,
Yes.
Nupur, can I just 30 seconds? You know the video clip that you are showing of I think the shop Zakir thing. Interestingly, if you look at the architectural embellishments on top of that shop, they are possibly, and if it's the same temple structure, they are of Hindu origin, whereas the shop is of Zakir. So obviously the Congress is wallowing in hypocrisy. There's nothing new in that. We know from the farm laws how hypocritical they are. The fact is, I keep it very simple, Rahul, very simple, and that is the Occam's razor. Under whose watch did the demolition happen? It happened under the BJP-controlled municipality's watch. It's as simple as that. Whatever the locals can say, right, I trust them, I believe them, they may be vendetta or whatever. But the demolition of a 300-year-old temple happened under the watch of the controlled municipality. That is an irrefutable fact.
Yes.